Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, November 18th, day 774 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon. Jeremy, it's been a while since we've spoken. Good to have you.
It has, and I have to say I've missed you.
I've missed you too, but I do see you around the office, or at least on Zoom meetings. So we will be entering both of Jeremy's fields today and speaking about a newly announced governmental commission of inquiry into the failures leading up to the October 7th, 2023 Hamas onslaught into southern Israel that left 1,200 slain and 250 taken hostage to Gaza, sparking the war in the Strip. We will also speak about a rare government-ordered evacuation of a quote-unquote anarchic illegal settlement outpost. All this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon. First, some updates. The UN Security Council voted yesterday to adopt a U.S.-sponsored resolution authorizing the establishment of an international stabilization force in Gaza under U.S. President Donald Trump's 20-point plan. Hamas issued a statement rejecting the resolution, while the Palestinian Authority and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have both issued statements of support. The IDF submitted a formal position paper to Israel's political echelon on Sunday, in which the Israeli Air Force presented an explicit objection to the U.S.'s sale of advanced F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. Yesterday, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed that Washington will be selling the F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, and Trump is today set to meet with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Jeremy, let's turn to matters at hand, and Justice Minister Yariv Levin of the ruling Likud party will head a ministerial panel to determine the mandate of the government's controversial commission of inquiry into the failures surrounding the Hamas onslaught of October 7th, 2023. Now, just for a tad bit of background, ever since this devastating October 7th invasion and atrocities, the government has basically resisted establishing any kind of investigative body into thoroughly examining how this calamity could befall the country. So I think, first of all, Jeremy, we need to ask why the change of heart, and is this commission to be truly independent?
Well, I think the change of heart is really because it's kind of impossible to think that the October 7th invasion and the atrocities and the war which came after it could go without some kind of formal investigation on a national level, by serious authorities. As we've mentioned, and as lots of people have mentioned, this was the worst invasion of Israel ever. This was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And so the idea that, the government could get away with not investigating what happened and finding the causes and learning from the mistakes that were made to defend Israel in the future, the idea that we could do without that is just unthinkable. And I think the government understands that even if it wants to avoid one particular type of investigation, the State Commission of Inquiry, which is the most independent and the most, powerful investigative tool at the government's hands, even if it doesn't want to do that, then it has to do something. Especially now, for a long time, the government was saying, well, we can't have this kind of investigation going on where we've got a multi-front war. It will divert the attention of the commanders, the military commanders. It will divert, from the war effort. So while the war's going on, that can't happen. Well, now most of the fronts are, if not 100% quiet, much lower intensity than they were. And there's a ceasefire in place in Gaza. Obviously there's lots of issues with that front as well. But, we're in a state where, life is kind of coming back to normality, and it's hard to, evade this issue altogether. And the other reason is that there is pressure from the High Court of Justice, because basically back in I think June 2024, petitions were filed to the High Court asking the court to order the government to establish a state commission of inquiry. And obviously the government has resisted ever since, because of that major reason I said. And then on October 15th, the court issued a decision basically telling the government, well, there's a ceasefire in place now in Gaza, so we want to hear from you about this, what your position is on the State Commission of Inquiry. And you until now, the court gave the government like basically 90-day periods of extension. Said get back to us in 90 days and tell us where things lie. This time the court gave the government 30 days. That's obviously, it shows that the court was much more serious about this issue. And the court also rebuked, or didn't rebuke necessarily, but it made its feelings clear when the justice heading the panel said that there's no argument that we need some kind of investigation, so let's get going, basically. So I think those are the two reasons why we're seeing increased movement from the government on this issue.
Okay, so let's focus in on the idea whether this commission will be truly independent. And it sounds as though it's diverging from other commissions of inquiry in terms of how the mandate will be formed and who will be making up the actual commission. So fill us in on this. Okay,
so what the government appears to want to do is something akin to what is known as a government commission of inquiry. Now, that's a form of investigative body where the government picks the people who sit on the investigative panel. Okay, so clearly you can imagine that such a panel would appear to be less independent than where the government doesn't pick the members, such as the State Commission of Inquiry. Now, a State Commission of Inquiry is when the government says, okay, we're going to have a State Commission of Inquiry. It passes a cabinet resolution to that effect. And then the Supreme Court president picks the members of that investigative body. And the State Commission has powers of subpoena to subpoena documents, to subpoena witnesses and compel them to testify. So that's kind of the broadest possible powers that are available. A government commission of inquiry, which is an option under the law, it can have those subpoena powers if the head of the committee is a judge. And let me say that even in a State Commission of Inquiry, the government still gets to determine the mandate of that panel, meaning what topics it can investigate. So both in the State Commission and the Government Commission, the government tells the panel what it should be investigating. And so in this case, it definitely appears that the government in either way wants to expand the kind of topics it wants to deal with and look kind of more deeper, because within the right wing of Israeli politics, there's for a long time now, and especially under this government, numerous allegations that the judiciary and the legal system has hampered to some extent or to some effect the ability of the government to enforce its security policies and so on. And so those are things which are definitely going to come up. As you said, Levin has been appointed the head of this committee to report back to the Prime Minister about what they want the government commission to cover, and those seem to be some of those topics, the broader topics which they want to include. But I should also say that it's not clear what the government actually wants to do, because in the government's response to the court, it made a very vague outline of how it wants to proceed, so that it's not necessarily apparent that it wants to have a formal government commission of inquiry. It might even try and pass legislation to create a different form of investigative panel altogether. So we have to wait and see. The government said it's this ministerial committee is going to get back to Netanyahu in 45 days, and then the government will update the court in 60 days. So we'll know more then exactly what direction the government is going down.
Okay, so that sounds like several months from now. But in the meantime, what appears to me is clear is that because of this lack of trust between the government and the Supreme Court, we're seeing that the regular, quote unquote, regular State Commission of Inquiry is off the table. It is just not going to happen because the government does not trust the Supreme Court enough to appoint somebody who would be non-biased. It sounds to me. Is that a good reading?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the allegation by the government. This government, first of all, especially Justice Minister Yariv Levin, doesn't even recognize the Supreme Court President Yitzhak Amit as the president of the court. It's an issue we've covered a lot. There's intense animus between this government and Yitzhak Amit. They see him as a liberal, a diehard liberal who basically wants to thwart the government at every turn. And not that I don't think that is an accurate description, and I don't think that their allegation that a committee, the members of which are chosen by Yitzhak Hamit, will be biased against the government, I don't think that is founded on anything in particular, and they haven't yet claimed that in court either. That's not something they've claimed or argued, because I think that would be a very difficult argument to make in a legal briefing. So, but it definitely seems, as you said, that they are not interested in the State Commission of Inquiry. They don't want that at all. And in fact, we've seen reports that a former Supreme Court judge, who was probably the hardest line conservative on the court, who retired recently, that the government wants to appoint him as the head of its government commission of inquiry, or whatever kind of panel it sets up. This former Justice Yosef Elron, he was an advocate of judicial restraint and was very conservative, and which basically meant that he frequently he frequently ruled in favor of the government in numerous cases. And so I guess the government apparently sees him as somebody who would be a good pick to head this investigation. He retired in September, which means he has actually 3 months to write any opinions which he didn't get around to before he retired. And that means that he can only take up a new job after, I think, at the end of December. So some people have said that it's possible the government is kind of dragging things out in terms of the proceedings with the court in order to wait for Elron to become available to head up its commission.
Let's get to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon. Security forces and civil administration personnel yesterday conducted an evacuation and demolition operation against an illegal settlement outpost in the Gush Etzion region of the West Bank. This was apparently in response to accusations from a local council head in the West Bank that there was anarchy in the area. And indeed, there was a bit of anarchy on the ground when the evacuation forces came in, and it led to several wounded officers and the arrest of 6 Israeli lawbreakers. So, Jeremy, there are, of course, several reasons why the evacuation of this Tsur Misgavi outpost is significant, especially under the current coalition. But what jumps out to you, first of all? What's the significance of this evacuation?
I think what jumps out at me is that this government, since it came into office, has really refrained from enforcing the law against these kind of so-called hilltop youth, extremist settler activists who have set up illegal settlement outposts all around the West Bank in the 3 years of this government's tenure, have attacked Palestinian civilians in Area C and sometimes even in Area B, where the Palestinian Authority has civil responsibility. So they've even entered those kind of villages and towns to do arson attacks, spray, graffiti, numerous other kinds of criminal activity, destroy olive trees and other agricultural efforts. So we haven't seen any effort to combat this kind of wild criminality. And yesterday, what we saw was an effort to crack down on an incident where this kind of anarchic law breaking interfered with the kind of formal state-backed settlement enterprise. Because what happened was this Tsur Misgavi outpost, an illegal outpost which had not been authorized by the government, was situated on land which had been designated for an access road to, I think, either a new settlement or a new settlement neighborhood. And this is in the Gush Etzion regional, this is under the authority of the Gush Etzion Regional Council. And the head of that regional council, he spoke to the civil administration, which enforces the law in the West Bank on civil issues. And it asked them the head of the Gush Etzion Regional Council asked them to demolish the outpost because that was interfering with the grander plans for greater settlement expansion in that region. So, to a certain extent, I think we see here what happens when the law enforcement is not applied to a certain group, then eventually it can actually come back and even disturb and draw the attention of the state authorities when it contradicts their plans.
Right. This brush up between the, shall we say, official settlement authorities and these more extremist settlers is really fascinating, because I think much media just paints every settler with one brush. And we're seeing here in this particular situation that the established settler bloc of Gush Etzion is saying, hey, you guys are beyond the pale. You guys need to get out of the way. You're creating anarchy, and it's not good for the settler enterprise, which, of course, is all mostly about creating facts on the ground, building up and creating facts on the ground. And by not allowing this new neighborhood or new part of that government permitted building to take place, the settler enterprise is in a way turning on its own and saying, get out of here, get your extremism out of here. We don't want you to be associated with us. And I find this really fascinating, of course, on the background of everything that we've been seeing, this uptick in violence that we've been seeing, over the olive harvest, but basically since the war broke out, on October 7th, 2023. What do you think about that idea, Jeremy?
I think there is a lot of truth to what you're saying, in that the mainstream settlement movement, obviously within Israel, it has much more legitimacy than outside of Israel. But what delegitimizes it within Israel is this kind of extremist violence by what I think is, a band of a few hundred of these extremist hilltop youth types. And we've seen that the level of violence and the intensity of the violence has been so severe in recent weeks, like you said, in particular in the olive harvest season this year, that it's attracted, international attention, including from the Trump administration. So U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said just the other day that he was concerned about the events in the West Bank, and he said it could undermine the peace efforts in Gaza. So when you have the U.S. Secretary of State talking about this violence, that's concerning for the people who are advocating for the settlement movement, like Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and the head of the religious Zionism party, like Itamar Ben-Gvir and others. That is concerning, because they don't want their especially Smotrich, he doesn't want his mainstream efforts, which are being advanced as far as is possible, and sometimes to a dubious extent within the limits of the Israeli law. He doesn't want that to be undermined by this band of extremists who are, getting caught on camera, clubbing Palestinian women round the head and setting fire to Palestinian homes. That doesn't help Smotrich's effort to advance the settlement project as far as possible, even though at the end of the day, the goals of the hilltop youth and Smotrich to a certain extent align, in that they want to ensure that the entire West Bank becomes part of Israel and to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state. Smotrich is anxious to make sure that his kind of more statist mainstream approach is not undermined by the extremists.
Right. I think there is a huge difference in terms of approach. As you said, Smotrich is taking the official tracks, going through the mainstream channels. And these, we're calling them hilltop youth. But, honestly, I think in many cases, there's just a call put out on various extremist social media channels, including WhatsApp, for kids. It's mostly youth, as far as I understand. They could be probably 16 to 22 or so, to come out and just rabble rouse. And the idea that force versus settling is being used among these extremist youth is creating a large swath of the settlers, the mainstream settlers, to really begin to turn on this I couldn't even call it a movement, but on this approach of using extreme violence against the Palestinians. I think it's really fascinating. And do you think that there will be concrete steps taken in the future? I mean, we have this evacuation already on the books. This happened. And I just wonder if the mainstream settler movement is, I don't know, creating programs against extremism or things of that nature to tamp down on this problem.
I'm not aware of any especially prominent efforts to, anti-extremist efforts within the mainstream settlement community at the moment. There's always there are and has been and will be liberal elements of the settlement movement and the residents of the settlements who do oppose this kind of thing, and also various coexistence programs that already exist. But in terms of the broader issue of cracking down on the actual violence, the problem there is that the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, there is great suspicions that he has been encouraging the police to turn a blind eye to the violence. Because remember, not so long ago, Ben-Gvir himself essentially was a hilltop youth. And when he got over that stage of his life, he became a lawyer for the hilltop youth. And so Ben-Gvir is an extreme far-right ideologue, an ultranationalist. And if you really want to go into what the hilltop youth are doing, the hilltop youth, these extremist settler activists, to a certain extent, it looks very much like they're trying to kick as many Palestinians out of Area C, where Israel has full security and civilian control, to remove them from Area C and to push them back into areas A and B. And we see that by systematic violence against these villages and small rural communities in Area C, where these Palestinians, they have an agricultural-based lifestyle, and they're very vulnerable because they've got no protection. And so we've seen hundreds of these people leave their little kind of ramshackle villages and hamlets, and that appears to be, as I said, the goal of the extremists, and that's something which Ben-Gvir can get on board with, along with some of his senior advisors, who, again, one of his senior advisors was also one of these until recently one of these extremist hilltop youth types who had a file in the Shin Bet and was detained by the police on several occasions due to extremist activity. So it seems hard for me to believe, even with all this outrage, that there will be a significant crackdown on this extremist violence unless Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gets involved. And we saw one, on Sunday he did speak out against the violence, and I think that was a consequence of the terrible publicity that has been caused by this extreme violence in recent days. So whether or not he pressures Ben-Gvir to have the police crack down on this phenomenon, it remains to be seen.
And Jeremy, I just want to end. You mentioned that these hilltop youth, who are the most extreme of the extreme, are probably a couple hundred at the most, and put that into context with how many settlers are there at all.
It's really unclear how many of these extremists there are. It seems now that it could be more than 200. It could be 300-400. It's not clear. There are 500,000 settlers in the West Bank, in the settlements across the West Bank, and the international community also considers the 250,000 Jewish residents of East Jerusalem to be settlers as well. But usually, when we talk about settlers on the Times of Israel, then we're talking about the 500,000 in the West Bank proper.
All right. Thank you so much for putting all of this into context for us, Jeremy.
Always good to be with you, Amanda.
Likewise. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow. Shalom.